The one thing that you don't use on children is violence. That just damages them. It gives them low self-worth and makes them angry. The best you can do is love them to bits. But that doesn't mean you don't show them when they've done something wrong. It doesn't mean you don't have consequences in place if they're doing the wrong thing, because your job is to train them so they can fit into society. And when kids aren't held responsible for their actions that are negative, they end up being brats, and the police end up having to teach them lessons. And so it's up to the parents to supply those lessons. Welcome to Satsang. Yes, Si.
You're both awake and a parent. From this enlightened perspective, what's your advice to parents?
If you become a parent, you are responsible for the life of a child. And in being responsible for a life of a child, you have to do your very best to make sure that they grow in a healthy way. And for me, I looked at the whole situation and realized that the best thing for my kids was to be around my wife and myself. And so when they got a little older, we homeschooled them, because I didn't like what was happening in the schooling system in Australia. The level of competition that happens in academia and in sporting just prepares people for war. Someone has to win, someone has to lose. It creates low self-worth in people. And I wasn't willing to put my kids through that. And so my whole idea of raising children was to love them to bits and not put them in any form of jeopardy. And from my experience at school, I saw the way the schooling system worked put kids at jeopardy. For me, it's against the heart to beat other people. And I'm just not into competition. If I have to win, everybody wins, or I won't play. It's simple. Because that's the way of the heart. When you're in touch with heart, when you're in touch with love, you can't beat other people and think that's a nice thing to do. You can't be into competition and think that that's a nice thing to do. When you're in touch with heart, you want to take care of everybody. You want everybody to win. It's only when you're out of touch with heart that you get into competition and the fierceness and the brutality of it. And so as a parent, I assisted my wife in homeschooling. She was more the academic type, so she didn't go to work, she homeschooled, and I went to work and made the money to support the family. And I spent as much time as I could with my kids, because that's what works for them, when they feel loved and supported.
Does your advice to parents differ when talking to seekers who have children?
No, it's the same advice. Not many people actually ask me for advice about how to raise children.
Can having children be an obstacle to higher consciousness and enlightenment?
Depends a great deal on your attitude. For me, when I had children, I realized that a lot of my life was over. I couldn't just jump in a car and go out to a pub or go to a movie or go to a cafe. I had to make sure that they were taken care of, and they usually had to come with me. So my life changed to be more around the house than out. And I accepted that. I didn't fight with it, I just accepted it, and because I accepted it, it wasn't a problem. It is more difficult, I think, for women than men with children in the game of higher consciousness, because children tend to want to be more with mum than dad, especially in the early years, and they demand attention, and they need attention, and mum has to give it to them, more so than dad. So it's easier for dad to be practicing spiritual practices while having kids than mum, particularly in the early years. For me, I used to like formal meditation, but I didn't do it during the day because my family were around and I was working as a naturopath and psychotherapist and then as a satsang teacher. So I meditated at night. My family would all be in bed and asleep by 9 o'clock. So I meditated from 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock in the morning. I used to love it. Silence by myself.
How can someone maintain that love for their children even when they're being very difficult and testing a parent?
The one thing that you don't use on children is violence. That just damages them. It gives them low self-worth and makes them angry. The best you can do is love them to bits, but that doesn't mean you don't show them when they've done something wrong. It doesn't mean you don't have consequences in place if they're doing the wrong thing, because your job is to train them so they can fit into society. And when kids aren't held responsible for their actions that are negative, they end up being brats, and the police end up having to teach them lessons. And so it's up to the parents to supply those lessons. But those lessons don't involve violence.
When you're talking about putting discipline in place for children, a question that comes to me, having seen you advise parents quite a bit over time, is what do you think is the biggest mistake that you see parents making in preparing their children for the world?
The biggest mistake is they think they know how to do it when they've never trained in child psychology. People think because they can have a baby, they can raise a child. Man, I trained in child psychology before I had children. I think it's arrogant to think you can do something you've never been trained in. It's arrogant to think that you can actually influence a young person's mind when you don't really know how to. But I think that arrogance is pretty common.
Can being a parent help seekers on a path to higher consciousness?
For me it did, because it taught me more about acceptance and surrender. Because when you have children, you have to sacrifice yourself. And if you can do that with full acceptance and let go, you're learning something that is invaluable. You're learning unconditional surrender, which is actually the only thing you need to learn to raise your consciousness levels towards enlightenment. And so the inconvenience that you have sometimes of having children can be a huge advantage to someone who's a seeker who uses what's happening with the children as a teacher.